him and Eli. So that's worth watching. As far as Beckham hasn't been on the field in training camp. He pulled a hammy in the spring during OTAs, came back into training camp, lasted a few plays in the first practice, and did it again. Tom Coughlin doesn't have a lot of patience for injuries, especially when it comes to a rookie. So it's hard to tell yet.
Okay, I've never understood that with him. He seems to be impatient with anybody getting hurt, but it's like guys get hurt in the NFL. It happens. What are you going to do?
Well, you got to remember, Tim. He was one of Bill Parcells' acolytes. So
yes, I'm surprised.
Parcells' thing was, if you're hurt, you don't exist. You're invisible to me. And while Coughlin's not that cold, he does think the same way.
I'm surprised he's not calling him by a female name yet.
Well, he's not that kind of guy.
Yes,
and
I know.
To be honest, everything I've heard about Beckham, and actually Les Miles was at Yankee Stadium over the summer, and I actually talked to him a little bit about Beckham. Beckham seems to be a tough kid. I'll tell you, just from talking to him the one day last week, he's a bright kid. He's an intelligent kid. He seems like he's really chomping at the bit to get back out there. So I don't think it's a matter of the kid's dogging it. I just think it's an unfortunate situation for him where this happened right at a crucial time, but it's going to hurt his development. It's certainly going to hurt. The Giants really were counting on him to be the number 3 receiver. And you asked a question earlier, who else besides Cruz and Rendon do they have? That's a concern because, Beckham hasn't been out there, and they have a 5-way battle at tight end without really a strong leading contender, although Larry Donald has looked good so far. So they need someone else to step up.
What about, let's switch teams now. Let's get to the Yankees. They made a trade last week with the Red Sox. What do you think about it? And people are starting to quietly whisper, hey, maybe the Yankees aren't making the playoffs this year, which wouldn't bother me as a Met fan, even though the Mets are going nowhere.
Honestly, beginning of the year, Rob, I thought 85 wins was right around where they'd be. It wasn't exactly a talented roster. And then, Sabathia goes down. Nova goes down. Today's a big day for the Yankees because they might find out some news about Tanaka and where he stands with his elbow. Honestly, it's almost smoke and mirrors that they're only 5 games out in the East. They're only a game and a half out in the wild card race. But honestly, I'd be really surprised if this team makes the playoffs.
Yeah, same here. And this goes, to me, it goes back to last year where I was screaming, and I know I told you probably at least once or twice, I would have traded Cano. I would have racked up some prospects, and I would have tried to speed up the turnaround. They don't really have, or I didn't think they had anybody who really was tradable, with the exception maybe of David Robertson. And there was absolutely zero talk about trading him. And you could always try Betances in the closer role. I think he's obviously well suited for it. But the Yankees, they're always programmed to go for it, but right now, really realistically, they're looking at a wild card. So that puts them in the 1-game playoff. And what if they lose that game? Is it all worth it? And is it all worth the whole go for it mentality just to play one pseudo postseason game?
For the Yankees, yes. I think.
Well, I think the thing is, yes, his ratings last year were abysmal. And I think the Steinbrenners were desperate this year to boost them back up. Thank God for them that Derek Jeter's retiring. That's helped ratings. But, yeah, I think this wasn't a baseball decision. This was more of a business decision.
Well, at some point, I think you have to start making baseball decisions because how else are you going to remake a team and not have it be like it was in the late 80s when it just seemed like they were just throwing money at guys and nobody, it was just trying to plug holes here and there and nothing really ever worked. And that's kind of where it feels like it is right now.
I totally agree. I agree with everything you said, except it started last year. I think this started in the late 90s with the Yankees just unable to develop any kind of talent from the minor leagues. Brian Cashman gets a lot of credit for putting together championship teams, and certainly in 2009, he basically bought a team, put it together, which is harder than it sounds. But he has not developed prospects. All right, David Robertson is certainly one. Garner was a second-round pick they developed. Cano is now gone, obviously, but there really aren't many other names. Delmon Betances was a surprise. They weren't expecting a lot out of him in spring training, and he's become a revelation. But this is what you get when you have 15, 20 years of really core farm system.
Well, and the other part of that is that, I mean, the guys who they have developed, the guys like David Phelps and Chase Whitley, I mean, these are just like they're replacement level major league players. They're not stars. They're not guys who are going to carry your team. And I know obviously Yankee fans want another core four, but I mean, think about how rare that is to develop that many players and that many great players all at the same time. It's pretty much unheard of. Right now, the Cubs are trying to do it with their minor league system, but I mean, it goes to show you how long. I mean, we're talking 20 years later, and nobody else has replicated that. So, I think there are some pieces that the Yankees have, and obviously with the millions of dollars that they just threw at a bunch of Dominicans and Latin American prospects. They had that whole signing period that just happened a week or two ago. That's going to boost up the farm system, but that's a farm system that needs a big boost. I mean, there's a couple of players or a handful of players in it right now, but it certainly needs a lot more depth.
I think Rob just alluded to it, just that the Yankees are in a position to do what the Mets have basically done. But yeah, look what Cashman did this offseason. He signed Carlos Beltran. I mean, talk about adding age. He brought in, who else am I missing? McCann. A guy who statistically has been on the downside of his career the last 3 years, who is putting up, people are killing McCann, but he's basically doing what he's done the last 2 or 3 seasons.
Pretty much. And I'll tell you,
pressure.
I'll tell you this. I mean, I was critical of the Brett Gardner contract in the offseason because I thought it was too much for him. But I'll tell you what, that guy, he's been the Yankees MVP this year. So I'm certainly willing to say that I was wrong about that. I thought they overpaid the guy, but he's been phenomenal this year. He's probably been better than Ellsbury, who's probably making twice as much as he is.
Well, the thing that makes me wonder what was going on was not that they gave Gardner the money, but why would you go out and sign Ellsbury, who's just a very similar player?
Exactly, and it's in theory it's kind of a good idea because you have speed in the outfield and it improves your defense, but at the same time they're both leadoff hitters, so one of them has to bat in a non-leadoff spot. So now, I mean, Ellsbury's not a number 3 hitter, but they've been batting him number 3 all season, which I mean it almost goes back to back in like the Steve Kemp days. Where they signed, well, I mean, think about it. Like they signed Dave Collins, and they made Dave Collins a number 3 hitter. He wasn't a number 3 hitter. I mean, the guy was a speed. It was slap the ball and get on base and steal bases. That was his game. Just because you stick somebody in a spot in the lineup, it doesn't mean they're going to produce the way you expect somebody in that spot to produce. And that's a huge. And Ellsbury's here for another 6 years. He's not going away anytime soon. So It aggravates me sometimes that sometimes I just wonder what Cashman's plan is and how it's being executed. But, I mean, I look at it, the trade deadline in the last couple of weeks, the big phrase everybody's been throwing around is incremental improvements. And do I think the Yankees did that? Yeah, I do. But is it enough to make a dent in the postseason? I don't think so.
I agree. Well, my question is, where you're incrementally building on what? What's the foundation? Tanaka could have surgery tomorrow. We don't know. Okay, David Robertson is a nice young closer, a dependable guy. All right, Betances could be something very special, although his throwing motion concerns them because he's got a lot of moving parts in it that worry them about not only him going and losing control, but also possibly arm damage. But who else are you building on? I mean, like you said, you signed Ellsbury to a long-term deal. CC's got 2 years probably left on his deal. You don't know how Nova's going to respond from surgery. Yeah, I mean, Kuroda's 40 years old. He's going to be getting his AARP card soon. What are you building on?
That's the big question. There's a couple of guys in the minor leagues right now. There's Luis Severino, who I'm sure you've heard about. He's been the big breakout guy this year. That kid Reef Snyder, who they have they transitioned to second base, and seems like he's going to be the second baseman of the future. But aside from the 3 guys that they drafted last year, Aaron Judge, Ian Clarkin, and Eric Jagiello, who I know you like Jagiello because he's a Notre Dame guy. But what else? There's not a whole lot else there. And like I said, they signed a ton of Latin American players, and I know that a lot of them were highly rated. But all of those kids are anywhere from 16 to 18 or 19 years old. They're not going to make any kind of an impact on the major leagues if they even get there for at least 4 or 5 years. So if that's the plan, then your plan has a long way to go before it bears any fruit.
Absolutely, and that's why the Mets are a much more interesting team to cover right now. I mean, just a lot of young players that who knows what they'll eventually develop into, but there is some hope and there is some excitement. Whereas the Yankees,
as a Met fan, I look at the Mets. It's like 83, 84 over. If it could go into that type of thing where it takes off. They need a player sort of to kick them in the butt, like when they got Keith Hernandez and then Gary Carter, that type of thing. But the Mets are better to watch only because there's so much that could happen, I guess, is the best way to describe the Mets right now. I like that.
I totally agree. I think, let me tell you, if the Yankees had the Mets pitching prospects, they would be inflated to the next Roger Clemens, Randy Johnson, and Greg Maddux. I think the Mets have actually tried to temper expectations a little bit, and I think that's a very good sign.
Well, hopefully Bartolo Colon gets his 200th win. He's
who cares?
Well, he's trying. He wants to be the third Latino to go over 200 wins. Juan Marichal and
Bartolo Colon only wishes
Pedro Martinez.
Bartolo Colon only wishes his career wins matched his weight.
Well, he's working on it, I'm sure. So,
in which direction?
I didn't say which direction. I'm just saying he's working on it. So I mean,
the Mets right now though.
But the Mets didn't make a trade.
Let me ask you this, Jeff Roberts: Are Tulowitzki and Carlos Gonzalez the Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter? Do you see them in that kind of a role for the Mets? Assuming that trade is able to be made.
Well, the Mets absolutely desperately need a corner outfielder to add some pop. I don't know. It's a hard question to answer because that 86 Mets team had so many pieces. I mean, remember, Kevin Mitchell was on the bench on that team.
True.
Ray Knight was a very solid, dependable third baseman. They had, their second base platoon was extraordinary. I mean, Wally Backman hit 340, I think, that year or something.
Yeah. Him and Tuffle. It was the other thing about that team was it seemed like everybody on that team was kind of a fiery guy. Ray Knight was fiery, and Backman obviously was fiery, and Dykstra turned out to be a crazy man. But Keith Hernandez was driving it and cracking the whip on everybody, and Strawberry, despite his demons, he was a kid who with all the talent in the world and a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And that's the part with the current Mets that I don't know, because whatever they're going to add to this mix, a lot of the guys that they have now are going to be part of this. So does the current roster have that kind of fire that basically contending teams need to have?
Well, I think you've got a sleeping giant in David Wright. What I mean by that is this poor guy hasn't had a real number 4 hitter behind him in years. And I think if you actually put a real bat behind him, his numbers are going to go and at least be much closer to what he was hitting in his prime. You got Juan Lagares out there who, once a game, makes a play that just, makes your head spin. But beyond that, you do have some questions. Is Darno going to keep hitting the way he has since he was recalled? If he does, he's going to be a special player. If he's back to the guy who couldn't even get to 200, the Mets have a remarkable stable of young pitching. If they can go out now, I'm not saying they're going to get Tulowitzki. I'm not sure they want to get Tulowitzki with his injury history. But if you add 2 bats to that lineup, you're going to make Granderson better, you're going to make Wright better. What they need is a Tejada or a Flores or a player like that to develop into a Backman or a Dykstra, just a guy that can hit 280, 290, get on base. Then I think maybe you got something. But it's just fun to watch either way because even if Lagares is only a 250 career hitter, the way he plays the outfield, if you put a couple bats in that lineup, the way baseball is now, this will be a contending team.
My thing about the Mets is that there's a underlying thing that they still don't want to spend the money the way a team in New York should be spending money. And they have the money, or at least we think they have the money. And they don't seem to be wanting to make the next step to improve their team. They seem to be happy with the way it's going right now.
They want to operate like a small market team is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And is that because the money isn't there, or is that because the Wilpons are greedy?
I can't say I have any inside knowledge, but the rumors I've consistently heard is that the Wilpons have not recovered from the Madoff scandal, from the real estate market tanking, and that they took loans on SNY. They've had to sell part of SNY. I think it's more they don't have money. I think